FRC Team 254 has been at the top of the competitive robotics scene for nearly a decade. Five-time world champions and holding the record for the most regional wins of any team, the infamy held by this organization is second to none. But how does this legendary team perform at the highest level year after year? Join Carnegie Mellon Robotics Academy in our exclusive two-part video series interviewing the Cheesy Poofs and asking the questions that everyone wants the answers to. Part 2. General team questions. What are three things that have contributed to your success as compared to other teams in your area?
Yeah, so I think I can take this question. I feel like what sets us apart as a team mostly is our team history. I mean, we've been around for quite a while, and we've had mentors that have been around witnessing our team grow for all that while. And it really is great having mentors with almost 20 years of experience in FRC and engineering, educating year after year of students on the team. And that really helps us grow more as a group rather than having this like knowledge drop off essentially every time a senior class graduates. So I guess that's the first thing. The second thing I'd say that kind of ties into my first point is knowledge transfer systems. So things like our workshop series, pretty much all throughout the year, we're always having in-person and online workshops. We also have a workshop database. I think we have over 80 workshops in this database where we and which allows students to access workshops on pretty much every skill on the team, from business like grant writing and documentation to things like manufacturing, which is kind of weird because you might think that manufacturing is something that you need to learn hands-on. And while that's definitely true, we have introductory workshops to manufacturing tools in this database. And so it really allows members of our team to learn at their own pace if they feel like. But then there are also, of course, the live workshops, which are definitely better in some more hands-on cases. So I guess that's our second point. And the third thing, I think Dhruv was talking about this before, is our commitment to iteration. As he said, we are kind of perfectionists when it comes to building our robot, and we don't want to leave it in a state where we know it can be improved, but we would like hold back for, I guess, to keep things consistent. So the example that Dhruv brought up was perfect. Our 2019 suction climber, making changes right before the World Championship competition is definitely very risky, but I think as a team, we collectively thought that it was worth it to take that risk. So yeah, I think those three things really set us apart as a team.
Yeah, those definitely sound like they would have a lot of impact. And as far as off-season training goes, sounds like the method you found works best to pass knowledge is those workshops.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what a lot of people are struggling with, especially my team. We find that a lot of our knowledge is concentrated in one year right now. Like all the seniors have most of the knowledge, so we're trying to either like build documentation or figure out some way to kind of pass a lot of knowledge on. So you guys do a lot of documentation?
Yeah. So I mean, speaking of documentation, we do we rewrite technical binders, we do build blogs, and combined both of those things pretty much document everything that we've done in the build season, from like online design calls to non-technical meetings to like pretty much what happens every build, right? So pretty much having like every build season that we've ever had well documented out for us is not only helpful for other teams after we publish them, but is also something that we look back on quite frequently to see where we can improve as a team, to see like where things went wrong, where things were kind of better for us, and see how we can improve as a team based off of that. So yeah, I think what you're saying about documentation is definitely correct.
Okay, cool. So how do you handle recruiting of new members, especially like narrowing down the applicant pool? Do you guys have like an application, or can you just get in?
Yeah, I could take this one. So the first part of our recruiting is early on in the school year. We actually have info sessions where for the new freshmen, we'll go present about our team, talk about our goals, and talk about like what new members can get by like joining our team. So after these info sessions, we host what we call open builds. And what open builds allow freshmen to do is allow them to come in and actually learn and experience learn from experienced members and just get a feel for all the different sub teams our team has to offer. So these they can follow our like experienced members in these open builds. And then once in the application process, these the new members can actually indicate what sub team they're most interested in contributing to. And the way we make our decisions for new members is we base it purely off of interest and desire to learn. So while we think prior experience is definitely great, as long as this new member is committed to learning and is willing to put in the time to like learn and is like, their attitude is great, that's the main drive, the main focus we focus on when selecting new members. So just to give you some numbers about the number of students on our team. So before the COVID pandemic, we actually had about greater than 90 students on our FRC team, which we've downsized to about 60 or so members on the team during the after COVID. We get about 50 new applications per year, and almost all of our returning returning members reapply for the team.
Yeah, I think member retention is definitely very important because one of the things that teams struggle with is FRC starting in January, but like recruitment happening early on when the school year starts. So you got to find some way to keep everyone engaged and not leave before the actual season starts.
Yeah, I think one thing that kind of contributes to that for us is the fact that we have Cheesy Champs, which is our off-season tournament.
Yeah, definitely.
So early on in the fall, it really allows kids to see what like an actual FRC tournament can be like and how fun it is. And so I'd assume that definitely helps with member retention. It definitely got me hooked onto robotics. So
yeah, definitely a full competition like in the early stages of being on a team would be really, really cool to experience. So as far as new members go, how do you structure your team so that even if there's, like 90 or 60 kids, like you said, everyone feels like involved in some way?
Yeah, I can take this one too. So our FRC team is actually divided into multiple sub teams, both technical and non-technical. So some of our technical sub teams include software, assembly and wiring, design and manufacturing. And then we have some non-technical sub teams too, such as our business team, our media team, and our outreach team. So with these different sub teams, students can find the team that they're most interested in contributing to and can join that team. So essentially, rather than having like one big pool, we can actually break the team down into smaller teams, and thus they can learn specialized skills from these smaller sub teams. And the way these teams are structured is we have 1 to 3 student leaders per sub team, and these student leaders are responsible for delegating tasks to newer members based off of their proficiency, while also taking some of the higher level tasks themselves. And like I mentioned earlier, we obviously host these open builds so that students get the opportunity to explore as many sub teams as possible before making a decision on which team interests them the most. And again, in our application process, we actually ask them what team they're most willing to contribute to or most interested in learning about. And that way students can actually go on the sub team that they're most interested in learning. And yeah, it allows them to get the best experience possible from our robotics program.
Yeah. And then how do you perfect the balance between mentors and students when it comes to working on the robot?
I can take this one. I think we're very fortunate to have all of the great and experienced mentors that we do. And we definitely try to utilize their advice and input a lot. But we also want to make sure that students are kind of the main force behind the robots themselves. So by each sub team, like I think I can just go sub team by sub team technical wise. Like for manufacturing, students will mostly manufacturing everything themselves, especially like we have many students who are proficient on the manual mill, on the CNC router, on a bunch of other manufacturing machines. And then also for assembly and wiring, like mentors may have their hands on the robot for some demonstration purposes or educational purposes or things like that. But students are almost always the ones who are kind of doing the assembly and wiring themselves. And then with design, I think one of the biggest things with design is students will kind of do the CAD themselves, but then they'll submit their CADs to the mentors for like mentor reviews. And then the mentor reviews will allow us to really utilize the knowledge and experience that these mentors have while also kind of making the students do the actual work themselves. And also like the mentors really help us with the educational aspects, especially like with math. Sometimes you have to figure out how much force is kind of on each subsystem, or especially with like shooting this year, we were trying to figure out how to shoot on the move. The mentors had to help out with teaching us some of that math and physics as well. So we really try to utilize their input, but we are kind of, the students run the team, the students make the robot.
So I guess it's important to kind of have the mentors give some constructive criticism and direction and feedback, but then have the students do most of the actual heavy lifting.
Yeah. And that's something that really depends team by team. Some teams super love to pride themselves on having very little mentor input and being entirely student run. And that works really well for those teams. And we've found through our team that a good balance, bringing in the mentors for key moments, adds a lot of value to the students. And they take that knowledge, they take that inspiration off the team into college. And, you know, that's what the team's mission is about. So that's why we utilize the mentors the way we do.
And I guess having really valuable mentors makes students want to come back and be mentors themselves as well.
Yeah. Speaking for myself, I'm an alumni who's now returned to mentor the team.
Yeah, it's really cool. Okay, we have a couple fun ones. What are your thoughts on the Open Alliance?
Yeah, so I think I can take this question. So I think first is built on this idea of cooperation, right? And I think the Open Alliance does a great job of achieving that. But I think us as a team, we specifically would not necessarily be interested in joining the Open Alliance because we try to keep a competitive advantage during the build season. I think a good example of this is actually this past year in 2022. We built a climber with a Trust React bar, something that was pretty rare to see among FRC teams, especially at the teams that we saw at competition. So I think that really helped us throughout the season. And of course, there are other aspects about our robot that were unique, but I think that in specific was pretty rare to see. So that definitely helped us achieve the success that we did this past season. And so that is something that, like, if it was shared, we might not have seen that same success. So that's why during the build season, we like to keep those kinds of ideas to ourselves. But after the build season is done, we are definitely more than willing to share everything that we've learned. Like I said before, we write and publish build blogs and technical binders that pretty much document everything that we've done for that build season. And we are definitely super active on forums like Chief Delphi. I think Torrance here is actually one of our main respondents and can attest to how committed we are to answering those types of questions. So even though we aren't averse to sharing what we've learned, doing it during the build season isn't necessarily something that we'd like to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like Open Alliance definitely is like super valid for teams kind of starting off in FRC, but when you're at the very high level, it's kind of important to maintain that competitive edge and not just give away all your amazing ideas. So what do you think teams should focus on in their off season to prepare for the upcoming game in 2023?
Yeah, so I guess I can take this question too. It's kind of hard for me to generalize like what every team should do for the off season, but I think one thing that stays constant, no matter what you're trying to achieve as an FRC team, is having a good, solid team infrastructure. Things like organizing your workspace, things like having good mentors that are committed to your team. Because I mean, high school students graduate, mentors don't, right? Mentors are going to be the driving force behind a team that can sustain for years to come. So having those things set up, especially for a rookie team or new and upcoming teams, having those things set up before the build season is super valuable. And I know like lots of people don't like doing organization. I mean, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of it either, but this past year we spent 2 weeks organizing our lab and like redoing the layout, optimizing everything for both our FRC and VEX teams. So it's definitely something that we prioritize, even though it's not the most fun thing in the world to do. So I guess that would be our advice for that.
And then as far as mentors go, are most of your mentors alumni, or do you have some that are external as well?
I think we have Torrance here and a few others, but most of our mentors have come from other FRC teams or are just engineers and came to mentor our team.
Yeah, we're very lucky that our team is based in Silicon Valley, right? So we have a lot of access to mentors that are themselves engineers working in Silicon Valley. What's more typical on FRC teams is that your mentor is like the physics or math teacher at the high school. And so they maybe themselves didn't even do FRC. And that means they're coming with a different skill set. They have different tools and also time and availability and all that stuff. So
Definitely.
we have a large group of mentors that are very skilled, and we try to leverage that as much as possible.
Yeah. Okay, here are a couple that are also unrelated. What does your overall driver selection and training look like? Because 254 has definitely kept their drivers at a very high level throughout the years. Obviously, the driver's person in control of the actual robot. So how does your selection and training look like?
I'll actually take this one since Drew is reconnecting here. So the driver selection process is not that dissimilar from the team selection process in that looking for innate skill is less important than the qualities behind the individual. So in this case, we want to see a student that has extreme commitment to the team. We need a parents and family of that student that are also willing to drive their student to the lab on a Sunday at 6 p.m. to do driver practice and are able to support that level of a commitment. We also need that student to have really strong grades so that the school never comes knocking and saying that their grades are failing and they cannot participate in robotics. It's a lot to invest and put onto the shoulders of a high school student. And that's what makes the driver selection a pretty rigorous process. As far as the training goes, we do a lot of different types of drills. So the drivers might get to try things like playing against defense, driving and picking up hard to reach balls in certain corners of the field, and then repeating that drill over and over and over until they've worked out all the issues and got it as smooth as possible. Another thing that we should mention here is that we also have access to a nearly, I'd say 80% scale FRC field at our lab space. So having access to such a large field means that so many of our drivers can get to experience what that's really like, being behind the glass, fully accelerating, making sharp turns, doing full autonomous routines, things like that. And lastly, while I brought up the field here, one thing that our team does like to do is give back to teams in the Bay Area. So teams can come and use our field and themselves get some driver or autonomous practice and tuning by coming onto our field. It was a little harder last year with COVID, but it's something that we like to do and keep open throughout the season and off season.
Yeah, having field elements available is definitely extremely valuable.
Yeah.
And then, so what are the main things that this is kind of related to your off-season competition? What are the main things that go into running, successfully running an off-season competition?
Yeah, so I guess I can take this question. So I talked about this a bit before about Cheesy Champs, but when we're when we're running Cheesy Champs as an event and developing everything that goes into running the event, we're always keeping in mind the idea that people that come to Cheesy Champs want to experience a fun tournament first and foremost, and part of that fun is keeping up a high competitive standard. So I guess the tangible effects of this is we make rule changes to the FRC game manual to that pretty much trying to keep the game really competitive while also removing or adding things that might make the game more entertaining to play in. We have judged awards, so we're trying to create this holistic experience that mimics what a competition in the spring might be like. We also spend a lot of time on the smaller details. If you've ever been to Cheesy Champs, you'll know that we have signs like literally everywhere, and it's kind of obnoxious. Everywhere you look, you have like 5 signs staring back at you, but at least nobody's getting lost, right? And so it's those small details that we try to flesh out the most. Things like our AV systems. I mean, I could go on. But there's a lot of planning that goes into that. And the thing that we're always keeping in the back of our heads throughout this planning is the experience of the teams attending.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of things that can go wrong during a competition, and it's important.
We actually have people that are designated to solve those problems. So we're trying to be adaptable in those ways as well.
Yeah. So As far as if we're talking about off season, do you partake in off season projects? I know one that's pretty famous is your t-shirt cannon. But do you still partake in off season projects, and if so, how do you decide what they are?
Yeah, I can take this one. So yeah, we do partake in a lot of off-season projects. The way we decide it is mostly based off of like the usefulness for like student skill development. That's the main criteria it comes when we're picking the projects we want to do. So some of the projects we're working on right now, so one of them is an intake for football. And the reason we're trying to do this is just to be able to be adaptable in a future game where like the game element might not necessarily be a round ball like it's been for the past 2 years. Just getting students familiar with like designing these different intakes and rapid prototyping. That's one thing we're trying to develop with this project. In addition, just like what you were saying about the t-shirt shooting robot, we actually refurbished it this year, and we're able to take it to a couple outreach events like a 4th of July parade. So yeah. I think Shockwave might also make a return at Cheesy Champs. No, yeah, I think that could possibly be no spoilers, but maybe. And another thing I want to talk about is just the importance of off-season projects. So I think I mentioned it briefly last year, a little bit before, but about Swerve and how that was our off-season project last year. And that doing Swerve as an off-season project, I think really helped all of us just get used to like the whole design process from a Swerve, all the way from design, assembly, and wiring to software. It just made all of us really familiar with the Swerve, so that when the build season rolled around, like we didn't spend as much time struggling as we did the first time. So I think the offseason really played a key role in our team's conversion to Swerve this year. And that's, I guess, one of the key reasons too why offseason is so crucial and plays a big role in our team's success over the last few years.
So as far as offseason, do you do most of your offseason stuff in like the school months before first starts or in the summer?
So we have both. So we have summer builds too that are optional, but we recommend summer build, especially for newer members, to get more hands-on experience that they might not necessarily get during the build season. And then we also have off-season builds in addition to that. And these builds either focus on making like these new projects, or also making changes to our existing build season robot from the previous build season, like making changes to it, trying to find ways to improve it. And we also refurbish it sometimes just for off-season competitions, which we might attend.
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely very important, and especially as far as Swerve goes. I feel like it's you need to have an off season of Swerve before you actually go into competition if you want to be successful with it. And then like that goes from programming, engineering, and then even the driver training, because it's a big switch. And obviously, when we were talking about your team size, 60 to 90 members, does everyone on that team go to the competition? And if not, how do you decide who goes and who doesn't?
We have travel team selections based off of attendance mostly, and also usefulness. How much of a role is that student playing at the competition? We'll typically travel with about 30 to 40 students and maybe 4 to 10 mentors. And then if we have a very local event like the San Jose State Silicon Valley Regional, all the students are able to attend because they are just living at home and driving themselves.
Yeah.
Typically, we are tracking attendance and having students sign in during a build and then get signed out by the mentors at the end of the build. And then we track that in a web app called Cheesy Hours that we've made. I think we might have released that too. And then we'll look at the hours, and typically students going to competitions like the first regional have over 150 hours logged by mid-March, starting in January. So as just a ballpark number there.
Yeah, attendance is definitely important. You want to see who's you want to make sure every person you're taking to the competition is valuable.
Yeah.
And then as far as so one thing that's super important in FRC, there's lots of important things. The one thing is kind of having the funding to get a lot of stuff like tools and kind of expand your team. So how important of a role do non-monetary sponsors play in your team, like a machine shop that water jets parts or something like that?
Yeah, so I think I can take this question. So we receive sponsorships from like in-kind sponsors, like you were talking about, and also monetary sponsors. And I think as a team, we value our relationship with both of these types of sponsors equally, pretty much, because we do definitely rely on in-kind sponsorships a lot during the build season to do things that we can't do with the facilities that we have. I mean, we're very lucky to have all the machines that we do, but we don't have the facilities to, like, let's say, powder coat things that we'd want to powder coat or anodize or weld things, and or maybe even like water jet cutting, things like that. So we have relationships with individual people that can connect us with those tools, and we have relationships with companies that do these things for us. So we're very lucky to have both monetary sponsors and in-kind sponsorships, and I think we value both of those equally, just because we're trying to reach a very high standard of excellence with our robot, and being able to utilize in-kind sponsorships to like get closer to that idea of perfection is something that we greatly appreciate.
And then further into that, one thing I'm like personally interested in is the Cheesy Poof robot aesthetics have always been on point. So do you guys do your powder coating in-house, or do you anodize stuff, or how do you do your
so I as I was saying, like we have companies that do powder coating and anodization for us. Names are Amex Painting and Gilbert Spray Coat, I believe. And so they do those services for us, and there's some planning that goes into like scheduling those and bringing like parts to and from their facilities. But I think it's definitely worth it. We do definitely like how our robot looks every year. So.
Yep. Okay, and then here's the last couple silly ones. How did you actually get your name? Because it's pretty unique.
Yeah, so I think our name comes from a South Park episode, I think. I myself haven't actually watched South Park, but I believe that's the case. I can't tell you the exact.
That's all there really is to it.
Definitely a long time ago.
Yeah.
Singing about Cheesy Poofs on South Park, and the students at the time, back in 1999, thought that was hilarious, and they named the team after it. And to this day, I think it's a good name. I think it's fun that our team name is unique and memorable, adaptable, remixable. Call it cheesy, whatever. I think it's fun to be unique. You know, we aren't just the Bellerman bots or whatever. You know, we've got a very standout name that I think helps with our branding and team image.
Yeah, definitely. And then, okay, so our last question. You guys have definitely had some very interesting recap videos and reveal videos. So are you planning on releasing a 2022 recap?
All I can say is that it is in the works. I can't give release dates or anything like that. So
beautiful.
We want to do one too. They just take a long time.
It's
definitely a lot of editing. Yeah, that goes into those. Thank you guys for your time. This was definitely very interesting. I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to hear a bunch of these answers. A lot of these were actually community suggested on the Open Alliance, some of the questions. So people will be glad to hear some from their favorite teams.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The CMU Robotics Academy for hosting us.